Across from him, huddled together like fledglings in a storm, were a group of young recruits from his home world of Xylos. They were fresh, their carapaces still smooth and glossy, their antennae twitching with unbridled curiosity and naive excitement about their first off-world assignment. To them, the galaxy was a grand adventure, a place of wonder and new experiences. Elder Cathar, the boldest one, a young male named Jethil, chirped, "Tell us again about the frontier. Tell us about the most terrifying thing you encountered." The other recruits leaned in, their eyes wide. They had heard whispers, of course. Every young Xylosian grew up on stories of the galaxy's dangers, the predatory Grell, the vast and unknowable silicoids, the political machinations of the Hive Kings. But Cathar had been a soldier in the Galactic Coalition fleet. He had seen the real galaxy, the one not found in recruitment hollows or adventure novels. Cathar took a long, slow sip of his broth, letting the silence stretch. The creaking of the ship seemed to grow louder. He set the mug down with a soft clink. "The most terrifying thing?" he echoed, his voice a low, gravelly hum. "It wasn't the void between stars or the radiation storms or even the biological horrors that lurk on uncharted worlds. The most terrifying thing I ever faced wore a smile." He had their complete, undivided attention. The mess hall, with its flickering light and grimy tables, faded away. "It was during the Viridian incursion, about 40 of your cycles ago," Cathar began, his gaze fixed on a point far beyond the metal wall. "The Coalition was young then, and we thought we understood conflict. We fought with fleets, with strategy, with honorable exchanges of fire. We followed the rules of war, a code that every sentient species in the known galaxy adhered to. Then, we found the humans." He paused, letting the word hang in the air. "They were a new species, just stumbled out of their own star system, full of bluster and a strange, chaotic energy. They joined the Coalition with an almost childlike enthusiasm. We Xylosians, with our long history and measured ways, found them amusing, primitive even. Their biology was inefficient, soft, pink, and fragile. They needed special suits just to survive in half the environments we considered comfortable. We didn't fear them. We pitied them." A young female recruit, her antennae drooping in confusion, asked, "But Elder, if they were so fragile, why were they terrifying?" Cathar leaned forward, the light catching the deep scars on his mandibles. "Because, little one, they had no concept of fear, or rather, they felt it, just like we do, but they used it as fuel. To them, war was not a strategic exercise. It was a fire, and they were the arsonists." He settled back, his voice taking on the cadence of a storyteller. "Our first encounter with them as a true military force was on a moon called Horizon. The Viridians had established a forward operating base there, heavily fortified, with overlapping fields of fire from plasma turrets and a garrison of their best troops. The Coalition's strategy was simple: a siege, blockade the moon, cut off their supplies, and force a surrender. It was the logical, civilized thing to do. The human contingent," he continued, a strange mix of awe and horror in his voice, "was attached to our fleet as a rapid response unit. We didn't know what that meant. They had a single, battered troop ship that looked like it was held together with hope and welding torches. Their commander, a female they called a captain, requested a meeting with the admiral. I was a young communications officer, and I was present. I can still see her. She was smaller than the average human, with pale skin and hair the color of harvested grain. She looked at our war tables, the projected siege lines, the supply estimates, and she just smiled. It was a strange expression, a baring of teeth. In our species, that's a sign of aggression, of imminent attack. But there was a light in her eyes, a kind of feverish gleam. She said, "A siege? That'll take months. We can have this done by breakfast." The admiral, a stately Xylosian with centuries of experience, was offended. He explained the tactical reality, the impossibility of a direct assault. The human captain just nodded politely, thanked him for his time, and left. We all thought it was a bizarre human joke. We were wrong. Cathar's voice dropped to a whisper, forcing his young audience to lean in even closer. The human ship didn't wait for the fleet. It went in alone. We watched from our sensors, expecting to see it vaporized in a glorious but foolish last stand. Instead, it started to dance. It had no heavy weapons to speak of, but it was fast, impossibly fast and agile. It weaved through the Viridian defense grid as if the gunners were shooting in slow motion. It was like watching a single, angry insect harassing a herd of grazing animals. He paused, taking another sip of his broth, the memory as vivid as if it were yesterday. Then the ship opened its bays. It didn't deploy fighters. It deployed pods, hundreds of them. They weren't sleek dropships. They were just cans. Cheap, single-use cans filled with humans, and they fell towards the surface like rain. The Viridian defenses focused on the dancing ship, the obvious threat. By the time they noticed the falling debris, it was too late. The cans slammed into the ground all around their fortress, cracking open to disgorge the humans inside, and then the screaming started. He looked at the recruits. Have you ever heard a Viridian scream? It's a high-pitched, keening sound like metal tearing. That night, their fortress became a symphony of it. The humans didn't fight like soldiers. They fought like predators. They didn't establish a perimeter. They didn't call in artillery coordinates. They simply ran towards the enemy, firing their primitive projectile weapons and screaming. Projectile weapons, one recruit scoffed. Kinetics? Those are museum pieces. Exactly, Cathar agreed. A direct hit from a plasma rifle will vaporize a human, but a cloud of hypervelocity metal fragments from 100 of their crude weapons will tear through a squad of Viridians before they can get off a single shot. The humans used the environment. They set fires. They created avalanches. They blew up their own supply caches to cause diversions. They had no regard for their own safety. We watched a human soldier, wounded and alone, crawl into a maintenance shaft with a satchel of explosives. Minutes later, the main plasma reactor for the base went critical. He had sacrificed himself to take out their power, and he did it without hesitation. The mess hall was silent, save for the hum of the engines. The young Xylosians were frozen, their broth forgotten. But that was just the beginning, Cathar said, his voice regaining its strength. Horizon was a battle. The true terror of humanity was revealed in the war that followed. You see, the Viridians, like most species, had rules. You didn't attack medical stations. You treated prisoners with dignity. War had a shape, a predictable rhythm. But the humans didn't see the shape. They saw only the goal, victory. When the Viridians retreated, we expected them to regroup. And we expected to meet them again in a few weeks for another large, organized battle. The humans didn't wait. They didn't give them time to regroup. They pursued them, not with ships, but with small, stealthy craft. They followed them back to their supply lines, their staging worlds, their homes. He leaned forward again, his multifaceted eyes gleaming in the dim light. They didn't fight their armies. They attacked their infrastructure. A human special forces team, whatever that is, would land on a peaceful Viridian logistics world in the middle of the night. They wouldn't engage the garrison. They would simply walk into a food processing plant and leave a few small devices. The next day, 1,000,000 tons of food for the front lines would be a cloud of toxic dust. Another team would sabotage a fuel depot, while another would contaminate a water supply. They weren't fighting a war. They were dismantling a civilization, piece by piece from the inside out. The Viridian High Command, proud and honorable, was baffled. They sent messages to the coalition, accusing us of cowardice, of terrorism. They demanded we call off these demons and fight like proper soldiers. The Coalition Admiralty was equally uncomfortable. They tried to rein the humans in to explain the proper way to wage war. A bitter, clicking sound, a Xylosian chuckle, escaped Cathar. The human ambassador listened to the complaints with that same bared-teeth smile. He then said something that I will never forget. He said, "You're fighting to win a battle. We're fighting to end a war. There's a difference. Your rules are for games. And this is survival." And that, Cathar stated, was when we truly began to fear them. We realized that their entire concept of conflict was alien to us. We fought with our heads, calculating odds and maneuvering pieces on a board. They fought with their guts, with a primal, desperate fury that we could not comprehend. To them, losing was not an option, not because of pride or honor, but because losing meant their species would cease to exist, and that knowledge gave them a terrifying, absolute freedom. He described another incident, one that had haunted his nightmares for decades. We were on a joint mission, a coalition force with a human platoon, tasked with capturing a Viridian communications relay. The mission was a disaster from the start. Our intelligence was wrong. The Viridians had a full battle group waiting for us. We were pinned down, taking heavy losses. Our commander, a rational Xylosian colonel, was preparing to surrender. It was the logical thing to do. We were outnumbered, outgunned, and our escape was cut off. Then, the human lieutenant, a young male named Johnson, stood up. He wasn't taking cover. He just stood there in the middle of a firefight looking at the carnage. He pulled out a small device, a communicator of some kind, and spoke into it calmly. "This is Apache 6, he said. "We are at the primary objective. Situation is FUBAR. Request immediate fire mission on our position. Coordinates are being transmitted now. How copy? Over." His own soldiers looked at him in horror. Our Xylosian commander shrieked, demanding to know what he was doing. Johnson just looked at him, his face smeared with dirt and blood, and said, "Sir, with respect, if we're going down, we're taking this whole mountain with us. Those coordinates are for the main fuel dump. It's right underneath us. The blast will wipe out their entire battle group. We won't feel a thing." He was going to kill himself, and every one of his own soldiers and us to destroy the enemy, Cathar whispered. He was smiling. He was terrified. You could see it in his eyes, the way his hands shook. But he was smiling, and he was completely, utterly serious. A collective shiver ran through the young recruits. "What happened?" Jathil breathed. Cathar's mandibles clicked in a dry, humorless laugh. "The human fleet. They did the illogical thing. Instead of letting him die, they launched every fighter, every shuttle, every piece of debris they could throw into the sky and came to get us. They took horrific losses, sacrificing dozens of ships to punch a hole in the Viridian blockade for a single, battered transport to slip through and snatch us from the surface. They saved us. They saved us not because it was strategically sound. It wasn't. They saved us because Johnson was one of theirs, and they would not leave him. They would burn their own navy to the ground to save one of their own. That's the contradiction. That's the heart of the terror." He looked at each of them in turn. "They are the kindest, most compassionate species you will ever meet. They will adopt orphaned alien children, dedicate their lives to curing your diseases, and weep at your suffering. They will share their last meal with a stranger. They build universities, hospitals, and art museums on barren rocks, just so other species have a place to learn and create. But cross them." Cathar's voice became a low, dangerous vibration. "Threaten them, or threaten something they love, and that kindness vanishes. It is replaced by something ancient, something that lurks in the darkest parts of their evolutionary past. They become the most efficient, most ruthless, most utterly unstoppable killing machines in the galaxy. They don't want to conquer you. They don't want your resources. They don't want your submission. They want you gone. They want to erase the problem so completely that it can never ever threaten them again." He finished his broth, the mug empty. That is why the human battlefront was absolute terror. Not because they are monsters, but because they are not. They are us. But with a switch inside them that once flipped, knows no limits, no rules, no end. They will fight with tooth and nail, with broken glass and harsh language, with their last breath and your own weapons. They will turn your strength into a weakness and your weaknesses into their weapons. They will sacrifice themselves without a second thought and mourn their dead for a lifetime. They are a paradox wrapped in a riddle, and they are, without a doubt, the most terrifying thing I have ever encountered in all my years among the stars. The young recruits sat in stunned silence. The adventure, the wonder, the naive excitement had drained from their faces, replaced by a dawning, profound respect and a deep, unsettling fear. The galaxy was no longer a playground. It was a place where nightmares were real, and those nightmares wore friendly smiles. Cathar stood up, his old joints protesting. He placed a gentle four-fingered hand on Jathil's shoulder as he passed. "Remember this, young ones," he said softly. "The universe is full of wonders. But if you ever see a human ship, be polite, be helpful, be their friend. Because the last thing you ever want to be is the reason for that smile to turn into something else." He shuffled out of the mess hall, leaving them alone with the silence and the newfound weight of understanding. The freighter continued to groan and creak, but to the young Xylosians it now sounded less like the ship and more like the echoes of a terrifying long-ago war.